Waiting on God's perfect timing can often feel like a test of our deepest faith. It challenges our patience, our expectations, and sometimes even our hope. In a world that teaches us to hustle, achieve, and move fast, the idea of waiting, especially when there's no clear end in sight, can feel like torture, but trusting the wait is one of the most profound ways we grow spiritually. It's a space where God asks us to let go of control, to loosen our grip on our plans, and to believe that His timing is not only better, but perfect. There's something sacred about the silence of waiting. It's in that silence where God often speaks the loudest, not with answers, but with presence. When everything around you seems motionless and your prayers go unanswered, it can feel like heaven has gone quiet. But silence doesn't mean abandonment. Sometimes it's God creating room for something far greater than you imagined. He's not rushing because what He's building in you and around you requires a solid foundation. Quick answers may satisfy your short-term desire, but delayed answers shape your long-term destiny. Trusting the wait means trusting God's character. It's not about knowing exactly what's coming next. It's about knowing who holds your future. It's about standing firm even when the ground beneath your feet feels uncertain. It's about walking in faith when your emotions are screaming for reassurance. And it's about believing that God is for you even when nothing is going the way you hoped. Faith isn't proven in the blessing, it's proven in the waiting. When you choose to trust God without seeing the full picture, you're showing that your faith is anchored in who He is, not just in what He can do. This kind of trust requires surrender. It means laying down your timeline, your expectations, and your sense of urgency. It's saying, God, I don't understand, but I trust you anyway. And that level of surrender doesn't come easily. It's something that is forged through time, tears, and moments of wrestling with doubt. Yet it is in these very moments that God molds our hearts. He is never late. He's never off schedule. What feels like a delay is often divine preparation. When you begin to trust the wait, you start to see beauty in the stillness. You begin to notice how God is working in the background, and your heart in your circumstances and in the people around you. Your prayers become less about when will it happen, and more about what are you teaching me. Your posture shifts from impatience to anticipation, from frustration to faith. You no longer see waiting as wasted time, but as sacred time, time where you are being shaped, strengthened, and set apart for something more. And when the promise finally comes, you'll realize that the waiting wasn't just about getting the answer. It was about becoming the person who's ready to receive it. The struggle of uncertainty in the waiting season is one of the most difficult parts of walking in faith. It's in those moments when nothing is happening, when prayers feel unanswered, and when silence stretches longer than you imagined, that your heart begins to wrestle with doubt. You start questioning everything, your faith, your decisions, your worth. You wonder if God heard you at all, or if you did something wrong to delay the blessing. And the longer the wait, the louder those questions become. The enemy loves to creep into those silent moments with lies, telling you that you're forgotten, that you're overlooked, or that what you're waiting for will never come. Uncertainty has a way of shaking even the strongest believers. It's not that you don't believe in God's power. You know He can do it. The real struggle is in not knowing when or how. It's in feeling like you're walking in circles with no clear direction. It's when the vision God gave you starts to fade because nothing around you matches what you were shown. You try to hold on to hope, but with every passing day, it feels like you're holding on to air. That's where faith is truly tested, not when you receive the promise, but when you have to wait for it without any visible progress. It's in this struggle that your character is exposed. Will you still worship when there's no breakthrough? Will you still pray when nothing changes? Will you still trust God when the answer is silence? These are the questions that define the depth of your faith, Anyone can believe when doors are opening and blessings are flowing, but real faith is forged in the fire of uncertainty. It's when everything in you wants to give up, but you choose to press in. It's when your heart is breaking from disappointment, but you choose to say, God, I still trust you. You may not understand why the wait is so long, but there's always a reason. Sometimes God is protecting you from something you can't see. Sometimes He's aligning people and places behind the scenes that are crucial to your breakthrough, and often He's working inside you, building endurance, deepening your trust, and teaching you to depend on Him more than your own understanding. It's hard to grasp in the moment, but you're not being punished. You're being prepared. Even in the struggle of uncertainty, God is present. He sees every tear, hears every silent prayer, and knows every anxious thought. He hasn't forgotten about you. He hasn't left you. What you're feeling now doesn't disqualify you from the promise. It just makes the promise even more meaningful when it comes. So don't let uncertainty push you away from God. Let it pull you closer. Let it drive you to your knees, to His Word, and to a deeper intimacy with Him. Because even when the path ahead is unclear, His love for you is not, and that's enough to keep walking. The growth in the delay is often something we don't recognize until much later, when we look back and see how far we've come, not just in our circumstances, but in who we've become. At first, the delay feels like a burden, a frustrating pause in the story we hoped would move faster. We want results, answers, open doors, but God is more concerned with what's happening inside us than around us. The delay isn't punishment, it's preparation, and in that preparation, real transformation begins. The waiting season becomes a sacred classroom where God teaches us things we couldn't learn in comfort or speed. In the delay, our pride gets challenged. Our dependence on our own timing, our own strength, begins to break down. We start to realize that our plans are limited, our vision is incomplete. That's where humility is formed. That's where faith is refined. Not in having all the answers, but in trusting God even when nothing makes sense. In this space, patience begins to take root. Not a forced, passive patience, but a patience that is alive with hope. A patience that says, even if I don't see it yet, I believe He's working. God uses the delay to prune us. He cuts away the things that won't serve us in the next season: ego, fear, insecurity, doubt. He reveals the places where we're still trying to control everything, where we haven't truly surrendered. It's in the waiting that we're confronted with ourselves. And sometimes that's the hardest part, realizing that we're not quite ready for what we're asking for. Maybe our character isn't strong enough yet. Maybe our faith still needs strengthening. Maybe we're still trying to rely on our own ability instead of God's grace. The growth that happens in delay is often invisible to others and sometimes even to ourselves. But slowly, day by day, something begins to shift. Our prayers change from desperate demands to quiet conversations. Our focus moves from what we lack to what we're learning. We begin to see God's hand in places we never noticed before. And the small moments, the quiet reassurances, the unexpected provision, and all of a sudden, the delay doesn't feel like a waste of time. It feels like a divine appointment with growth. Eventually, you'll realize that the wait made you wiser. It made you stronger. It taught you how to stand when everything in you wanted to sit down and quit. The delay taught you how to worship in the dark, and how to trust without evidence. And most of all, it taught you that God is faithful, not just in the fulfillment, but in the formation. The growth in the delay is a gift, even if it doesn't feel like one at the time. Because the person you're becoming is just as important to God as the thing you're waiting for. Sometimes it's even more important. And when you finally arrive at the promise, you'll arrive ready, You are not alone. Even though the waiting season can feel isolating, even though it can feel like you're the only one praying, hoping, and believing with no results, the truth is that countless others have walked this path before you. What you're going through may feel uniquely painful, but it is not uncommon. Everyone who has ever walked in faith has, at one point or another, had to wait, and in that waiting they too felt the ache of silence, the frustration of delay, the temptation to give up. But just like them, you are seen, you are heard, you are not forgotten. In Scripture, some of the most powerful testimonies come from people who had to wait. Abraham and Sarah waited decades for the child God promised. Joseph waited in prison, falsely accused, forgotten by men but not by God. David was anointed king, but he spent years running from Saul before he ever sat on the throne. These people were chosen, called, and deeply loved, and yet they still had to wait. Their waiting didn't mean God was angry or absent, it meant he was working. Their stories remind us that waiting is not evidence of God's neglect. It is often proof of his divine process. When you're in a long season of delay, it's easy to scroll through social media, look around at friends or strangers, and feel like everyone else is moving forward while you're stuck. But what you see on the outside is not always the whole story. Behind every success is a struggle, behind every testimony is a test, and behind every miracle is a moment of waiting that required deep, painful trust. You are not less than anyone else because your blessing hasn't come yet. You're simply still in process, and that's okay. The enemy wants you to believe you're alone because isolation breeds discouragement. He wants to cut you off from hope, from encouragement, from truth. But the truth is that God is with you in the waiting. His presence isn't dependent on movement or noise. He is there in the stillness. He is close to the brokenhearted. He is near to those who cry out to him. And he has not turned his face from you, not for a second. There is comfort in knowing that you're part of a larger story. There's strength in realizing that waiting is a shared experience of the faithful. You don't have to carry the burden by yourself. Others have carried it, and others will carry it after you. What you're feeling is real, but it is not the end of the story. God is writing something beautiful with your life, even if you're only on the early pages. So take a deep breath. You're not behind, you're not forgotten, and most of all, you are not alone. The God who wrote the stars into the sky sees you, loves you, and walks with you, even now, even here in the waiting. My personal journey through waiting on God's timing has been one of the most defining experiences of my life. It wasn't just about sitting still and hoping things would change. It was about wrestling with uncertainty, learning to surrender, and allowing God to shape me in ways I never anticipated. I didn't choose the waiting season, it chose me, and at first I resisted it with everything in me. I prayed hard, fasted, asked for signs, and pleaded for quick answers. But the more I tried to rush God, the more I realized I was the one who needed to slow down and listen. There was a specific desire in my heart that I carried for years. I had dreams, plans, and timelines I thought were fair and reasonable. I couldn't understand why things weren't moving forward. Doors kept closing. Opportunities kept slipping through my fingers, and with each passing season I felt more discouraged. I began to doubt myself. Maybe I had misheard God, maybe I wasn't worthy, or maybe I had made too many mistakes. That's the thing about waiting. It doesn't just test your patience, it tests your identity. It brings all your insecurities to the surface. But in the middle of that confusion, something began to shift. I stopped trying to fix everything and started spending more time in quiet prayer. Not just asking God for things, but listening to him, sitting in his presence without an agenda. And in those quiet moments, I began to hear his voice more clearly, not a booming voice from heaven, but a whisper in my heart reminding me that I was seen, that I was loved, and that He wasn't done with me. I realized that God wasn't ignoring my prayers. He was working behind the scenes, preparing something I couldn't yet understand. Slowly, I began to see the fruit of that season. My character was being refined. My faith was deepening. I was learning how to be content in the present rather than obsessed with the future. I stopped measuring God's goodness by what He gave me and started trusting His heart even when the outcome wasn't what I expected. It wasn't easy, and there were still many moments of frustration and doubt, but I knew I was being changed from the inside out. And eventually the breakthrough came, not in the way I imagined, but in a way that made it clear that God had been orchestrating every step. When it happened, I was grateful not just for the answer, but for the journey. I saw how the wait had protected me, humbled me, and drawn me closer to God in ways I never would have chosen on my own. It taught me that the blessing isn't just in the fulfillment, but in the becoming. Waiting had turned out to be the very tool God used to mold me into someone who could carry the weight of the promise when it finally came. The purpose in the process of waiting is often hidden, wrapped in mystery and quiet transformation. When we think of waiting, we usually focus on what we're hoping to receive at the end: a job, a relationship, a breakthrough, a dream fulfilled. But God sees something deeper. He knows that the wait itself is not just a means to an end. It is the very ground where purpose is planted and grown. The process is not punishment, it's preparation. It's in the process that we learn to trust, to surrender, and to become who we were always meant to be. At first, the process feels uncomfortable. It stretches us beyond our limits. It pushes us to the edge of what we thought we could endure. And yet, it's in that very stretching where our faith is tested and strengthened. When we can't rely on circumstances or timelines, we learn to rely on God. We learn to hear His voice above our own fear. We begin to understand that His plan is always more complete than our own. Every delay, every closed door, every detour is part of something bigger than we can see. The purpose in the process is often found in the changes happening within us, not around us. God may not change your situation right away, but He's always changing you. He's building your patience, developing your character, and teaching you endurance. You may be waiting for a new season, but God is using this season to prepare you for the wait of the next one. If He gave you everything you asked for without shaping you first, you wouldn't be able to handle it. The process is God's grace in motion. It protects you from premature promotion and prepares you for lasting impact. There is also a deep peace that comes when you stop fighting the process and start flowing with it. When you choose to trust that every part of the journey, even the slow, silent, painful parts, has meaning, your perspective changes. You no longer see waiting as lost time but as sacred time. Time where you're being refined, redefined, and positioned for what's next. You stop obsessing over the outcome and start leaning into what God is doing right now. That shift is powerful. It turns restlessness into worship and frustration into faith. The process also draws you closer to God. In your weakness, you learn to depend on His strength. In your confusion, you lean on His wisdom. And in your loneliness, you discover His presence in a way you never have before. Those are the moments that shape your testimony, not just the blessings received, but the lessons learned in the waiting. And one day, you'll look back and realize that the process wasn't a delay after all. It was the very path God used to bring you into the fullness of your calling. Every step mattered. Every tear had a purpose. Every silent season was filled with His unseen hand guiding you towards something far greater than you imagined.